Hi everyone, welcome back to Superliminal, and on today I have the return of Guy Anderson. Guy was on recently and it's proved to be one of the most popular episodes that I've shared recently in terms of just how many people were messaging in terms of the information, what he shared, which was about Tartaria and the old lost world or the old civilization and all the technology and the healing and the lifestyle, the life-affirming quality and way of life that was intentionally destroyed and lost. So this time round, Guy's going to be talking about human cloning, which actually goes back way, way further than I'd realised before my conversation with him. It's a fascinating chat, and towards the end of the conversation, I share some what appear to be real-life examples of very, very well-known people who are actually clones glitching. But I hope you enjoy the episode as much as I did. As always, thanks ever so much for tuning in. Please do share this episode with someone else who you think may enjoy it. I'll put a pinned comment down in the description below so you can do that, in the comments rather, so you can do that. And as always, please do subscribe and hit the bell button to know when the next episode is being uploaded. And as always, thank you to everyone, my regulars, for your continual support of Superliminal. But anyway, enjoy the show, and I'll see you in a second. Hi everyone, and welcome back to Superliminal. And as you'll have seen from the intro video, I'm really, really delighted to have Guy Anderson back on Superliminal. Guy was on recently and we talked about Tartaria and Great Tartaria. And it has to be probably one of the videos that I've shared that I've had the most questions and responses from, both on the channel itself and also from various groups that I'm in on Telegram where I shared it. It certainly has sparked a lot of interest. So I was very keen to get Guy back on, and Guy really wanted to come back and share the conversation on his most recent book. There is a new book coming out shortly. But we want to get into the subject of human cloning, which is fascinating. So Guy, welcome back to Superliminal, and thanks ever so much for joining us again.
Thanks for having me back on. I enjoyed chatting with you last time, so it's great to be back here with you today. Thank you.
Yeah, no, my absolute pleasure. It was really fun. I could have gone on for another hour, but I keep forgetting that, you know, people's attention spans are a bit shorter than they used to be.
Yeah.
So Guy, one of the first, I was having a little think last night about this conversation, and before we get into the actual subject area of human cloning, and you know, people aren't gonna believe what you're going to share. But one thing that occurred to me is that given that we live in a world of such massive censorship, the first question I had for you was, how are you able to find credible and authentic research, especially online, given that things like Google and whatnot are really curated news feeds that are massively censored as well?
Well, Google is the last place I would look. So I don't use Google for research at all, and I don't use Wikipedia. Wikipedia is often something people reference, and of course Wikipedia is made up. You can go on there today and put down that you're a former gold medalist, you know, and you're married to a rock star, and you're a member of the Rothschilds family. You can put whatever you like on there. It's just made up. I mean, there's a lot of factual information on there, but Wikipedia is somewhere that people often reference. And it's not the place to go. It's basically Google's encyclopedia. So you have to go deeper. And unfortunately, that often involves having to go onto the dark web. But a lot of the information I got from human cloning goes back to 2012. That's when I started looking into it. I started talking to people on BitChute. I started following Donald Marshall. And then I was fortunate enough to have people reach out and share information with me. So I've got quite a few documents and bits and pieces. I then did some research into the Raelian movement and Clonaid in Canada. So My research comes from everywhere other than Google. Donald Marshall who's the one who was the first, I suppose, to make human cloning a big deal and to broadcast what happens in these dumb centres across the world, the underground bases. He was the first person to talk about that. And then following that, lots of celebrities have come out and claimed to have been cloned or softly disclosed it within their music, Britney Spears being one of them. So it's there for you to see, but what I'm very careful to do is if I don't know something is true, if I'm not absolutely paramount with this being factual, I have to use the word alleged. So, and I do that all the time when I'm talking about something that I've not been able to substantiate. But the story of human cloning is there for everybody to read in Genesis. And if if you want to take it back further than that, then the first text we have that could be referred to as biblical or telling the story of the Old Testament is the Epic of Gilgamesh. I believe carbon dating is fundamentally flawed, but it is older. It's older than anything else we have. So, if you want to find out about human cloning and the origins of it, read the Epic of Gilgamesh. And you'll then at the same time be very within moments of reading it, you'll be alerted to the fact you are reading what the Old Testament was based upon. So it's out there for people to read in lots of different places. But Donald Marshall is perhaps the person that really put it on my radar, and a lot of other people's too. But there's evidence of it being softly disclosed over the years. In movies, repopulation postcards in the late 1800s, anomalies with population. So a calculator, a pen and paper are a pretty good way to work out whether or not it's possible for us to double our population across the world in 100 years or not. So there are clues out there, but you've got to dig. I mean, my digging is, I spent 12 years digging into this. But yeah, but if anyone's interested, in my book Rise of the Clones, I always write the place that I reference the information from. So if someone wants to then go on and do their own research, I've given them a starting point, which I think is quite useful. I'm giving people, I suppose, enough ammunition to make up their own mind, but then go on using what I've given them to research it more in depth if they want to.
Yeah, sure. And I love that you brought up the Epic of Gilgamesh there, because the story of a dapper and the rib made me wonder when I heard it some time ago. Does that mean that we're all actually clones?
Well, descendants. So if we read the Epic of Gilgamesh, or you read the story of Adam and Eve, a lot of people say, well, it's Lilith, but for all intents and purposes, if we're talking about Genesis, let's say Adam and Eve, and if we're talking about the Epic of Gilgamesh, it's the same story. And in there, it tells you that that the partner was made. Adam's partner was made from taking a rib from Adam. Now, you could argue that that is a metaphor, which doesn't really matter, because whether they've actually carried out that procedure and cloned Adam to make another person, or just written about it, it's still cloning. To make another life from one life is cloning. But the Epic of Gilgamesh obviously goes into a lot greater detail, and it actually says that we were produced in the image of the gods, as a slave race, ultimately to mine for them, to replace the Igigi that had revolted and refused to mine anymore in the harsh conditions that they were subjected to. So it's there in black and white. You could argue that that's not how we were created, that Darwin was right, and the origin of species is a factual document, but it was funded by the Vatican. They wanted to be in control of an alternative story. So they had their Bible and they had an alternative, which is brilliant. It's far better to control both narratives than it is to have one thrown at you as a curved ball and not be able to control it.
Yeah, most definitely. And I remember seeing years and years ago that actually in Darwin's book, he gives himself a get out of jail card and basically says that this is just his theory, and he's happy
Mm.
to be proved wrong at some point later in the future, or words to that effect. But yet it seems to have been taken as a de facto religion. You know, you mentioned the Vatican,
Yes.
but that itself has become a religious text about human evolution, which when you look at it makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. But where did your personal interest come into? Because I know you've done so much research into our true history guy, but where did the interest from to look into cloning come from?
Well, I've been looking into everything really. I've spent the last 30 years down the rabbit hole, possibly more. I mean, it's approaching 40 really when I started looking at occulted knowledge, and that was through my father, um, getting me to read books that he'd found interesting and useful, and then as I got older, I started reading David Icke and so on. So I've always had this quest for occulted knowledge, I suppose. Um, but the human cloning was one of the first things that grabbed my attention when I started looking at alternative platforms to YouTube, and it was Donald Marshall that I came across, and everything he said made sense, and so I started digging. I read a bit of his work, and I've now got his books. Um, And there was just something about it because for years I believed there was no heaven and no hell. I was an atheist. I thought that we were evolved. You know, we had came from something that sort of crawled itself out of the mud. I really did believe that. And I believed the Bible was a made up book that gave people rules and laws to live by, until we had a judicial system in place. And as I've gotten older, I realised that actually, and I started discovering there were books missing from the Bible that are still in the Ethiopian Bible, like the Book of Enoch, for example, or the Book of Giants, Book of Jesus, and so on. I realised that actually there may be more truth to the Bible than we give it credit for as an atheist. Um, and as I've gotten older, and then I joined the Freemasons, I started to see connections between Freemasons and the Bible when they start talking about King Solomon. And they ask, when you join, do you believe in a supreme being? Things were shared with me. I was involved in lodge meetings where it was discussed, going through rituals and so on, normally just raising someone through the ranks. And I started to think, you have got some incredibly intelligent people in this building. They're all talking about the Bible. We're told that King Solomon was a myth, that we're now verging on mythology. And I thought, well, you don't have an organisation as big and powerful as this that bases everything upon something that quite possibly didn't actually exist. And so I dug. And as I've gotten older and I've researched more, in particular with Tartaria, I started to realise that the Bible, albeit badly translated intentionally, and a lot of the information missing, and based upon the Epic of Gilgamesh, certainly with regard to the Old Testament, that actually this is more likely to be true than not. And now, fast forward to today, I am convinced that the Epic of Gilgamesh is what the Old Testament's based upon, and that is how we came to be. So our very origins go all the way back to somebody somewhere, Enki, God, whatever you want to call this person or being, having the ability to repopulate en masse. And we saw that again with the population boom after the end of Tartaria, when that fell, a new world order began. So I think that the very same people or bloodline family that created us as a slave race have the ability to do that whenever they need to, and did that in the 1800s. So a very long answer to a very simple question. Human cloning became obvious to me the more I started looking into the Bible, the Epic of Gilgamesh, and spending a lot of time on alternative platforms.
Yeah, wow, fascinating. No, thanks. It's really good to get a broader view of what drew you to it, because people won't believe that this is so prevalent even in today's society, because it just seems so out there. And later on in the conversation, I'm going to share 2, 3 video clips of clones of very, very well-known, famous people, possibly glitching, or they may even be robotic clones. Who knows? But we'll get onto that a bit later. You mentioned there, Guy, about the. I know, having read your first book about Tartaria, that there was another. There's been several, but there was one of the last major great resets as such was about a couple of 100 years ago or so. And that's related to one of the chapters in your book called the Cabbage Patch Babies. Now, when I first saw this in your book that I read last year, I'm like, what, they're just dolls? What? Cabbage Patch Babies are just dolls? And I'm like, oh, they're not just dolls. There's a reason for that. So tell us about the relationship well, tell us about the last great reset and why, and then how that is connected to cloning and this Cabbage Patch Babies phenomenon.
I normally explain this the opposite way to how I'm going to, but the first thing I would do is I would say, have a look at photographs online of the Industrial Revolution. Look at mining, look at workhouses, and look at any kind of factory or farm, anything you can find that involves manual labour en masse. And what you'll see are photographs where 9 out of 10, even higher than that in some cases, you'll just see children. And I believe that that's where the name miner comes from, to refer to a child as a miner. Now, I believe that is because we used to send them down the mines.
Fascinating.
So my question would be, where were all the adults? If the children are the ones mining and working in workhouses and factories and mills and on the farms, where are the adults? Because they can't, the adults have to be at work. You know, they're not all master craftsmen out and stonemasons and carpenters and glaziers and architects. Where are they all? So there appears to be a boom of children in the 1800s in time and preparation for the Industrial Revolution. So that's the first thing I would urge people to do. Just have a look. You know, if you can see a spinning jenny or a coal mine or anything, you'll just see kids. The odd adult, but the majority kids.
Yeah.
Where are all the adults? That's the first thing to consider. Then you've got to look at the population. In 1776, which is when Tartaria fell and New World Order or Satan's Little Season began, we had a population, an estimated population of 770 million people. Within 100 years, it had doubled pretty much to 1.35 billion within 100 years. Now, you'd get people that would say, well, that's not impossible because people had larger families. Yeah, they did. They just didn't survive. You know, they were living in abject poverty and were subjected to sort of all sorts of diseases and outbreaks. So they didn't survive. A lot of the children never actually met adulthood. But what they don't tell you is during the same period of time, that same 100 years between 1776 and 1876, over 3 billion people died. How can you lose that many people in 100 years? Wait, you know, over 3, nearly 4 times the population of the world die and still have double the population left. That's divine intervention or bad maths or a complete lie. But all I do know is you can't magically do that. There has to have been something taking place. And I think the clues are there in plain sight. Soft disclosure. We have the first narrated movie that appears called The Cabbage Fairy by Alice Guy. 1 minute she's a secretary for a company that manufactures film, the actual rolls of film. The next minute she is a pioneer, actress, director, producer, and her first film happens to be The Cabbage Fairy. all about children being plucked from cabbages as babies and sold to wealthy couples. She says that she was inspired having visited a World's Fair in Paris and seen Martin Cooney's exhibition of the first incubator. But what she doesn't tell you is the first incubator with Martin Cooney at the World's Fair came out a year after she'd made the film. So sometimes they trip up. We've then got the orphan train movement, and they estimate 250,000 kids were moved from New York across the Midwest, and they were all orphans taken from the streets. You've just got to look at the population in New York at the time and see that it isn't possible for that number of children to be roaming the streets. Where are their parents? And then we have baby farms as well. Baby farming became really popular in the 1800s. These sort of places where you could dump your baby because you didn't want people to know you were pregnant, or you couldn't afford to keep it, or you'd lost your husband. And they would go to a baby farm, and you would pay them each week a small amount of money for its upkeep, and then come and collect it when it was safe to do so. But normally by then the child had been moved on and shipped abroad. So to clump cloned babies in amongst the orphan trains, the incubator babies, and the baby farms is a brilliant way of distributing them without anybody becoming a little suspicious of where these are all coming from. So it's really sort of looking at the maths and the numbers involved of where all these kids came from. So I think to be realistic, if they state categorically 250,000 children were moved from New York to the Midwest by the orphan trains, we can almost certainly double that. So we've got to find 500,000 kids from somewhere. Then we've got the incubator babies, and you could buy them. Apparently the babies on display were on loan from maternity hospitals. These are kids that are going to die.
I've seen videos of that. What's the guy's name? Jacob, who runs the excellent I'm the Improbable Dreamer channel on Instagram, and I think Facebook as well. I've seen him share videos of these incubator farms, and it just doesn't seem right at all. So yeah. I can sort of vouch for what you've said, because the evidence is actually there, hidden in plain sight. Because I guess it's like what these lunatics say. It's like, well, we told you, because the lady you mentioned earlier who did the film, that was probably their way of not bypassing of not breaking the karmic effect of not telling people. So yes. they tell us like in roundabout ways, which is not really fully informed consent. It's roundabout, but in their minds, these satanic lunatics think that, well, we told you, if you can't decipher it for yourself, then that's their fault. But apologies to interject, but I've seen evidence of that.
No, don't. So we've got these the incubator babies. We've got at least 250,000 kids that appear from nowhere. They can't all belong to homeless. They can't all be homeless or belong to people living in poverty. Then we've got the introduction of the Lunacy Act, which meant if your husband died, you were considered insane. That was one of the stipulations. If you lost your husband in battle, then they would take your children away from you, and they would incarcerate you into a recently opened asylum. So they were basically trying to take the children of a certain age to then redistribute and repopulate the world, but there weren't enough. So we then got the Cabbage Patch postcards as well. So we've not only got the incubator babies, the orphan train movement, the baby farms, and then Alice Guy with her movie. We also have the postcards, and they're also called repopulation postcards, and they depict babies being plucked from cabbages and being sold. So I think it's in plain sight, and I think the doll that came out in the 80s was a revival of that, because they were starting to clone again, and they were really cloning world leaders and celebrities from the mid-80s. Soft disclosure, as you quite rightly said, avoiding karmic retribution. It started to become popular in movies as well, quite a topic that was being used in movies. And then we had things like Star Wars with Rise of the Clones and the Stormtroopers. So it's soft disclosure avoiding karmic retribution. We can dismiss it as fiction or fantasy, but they believe they've covered their arse because they've told us and shown us what they're doing. It's for us to decipher. So the dolls were really important to this revival of cloning, because the story that was used for marketing the dolls, which Xavier Roberts released, was based upon him finding a cabbage patch full of babies. Magic dust was sprinkled on them, and the first baby that spoke to him said, "Please find us homes, or we're going to have to go and work in the gold mine." So it's
Wow.
there. It's there for everyone, and you had to adopt one of these dolls. You couldn't buy it, and if it broke and couldn't be repaired, you got a death certificate. So it's
Blimey,
there for
heck.
everyone.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's funny, isn't it? Like people listening to this information will be like slapping their foreheads going, is
Mm,
this for real? But
mm,
everything's up for grabs, isn't it? I mean,
mm.
this everything we've been told about our history, his story, as Michael Jackson famously shared, and we'll probably get onto Michael
Yes.
later in the conversation, is as the old saying goes, it's always written by the winners or the victors. Um, we were talking off camera just before we hit the record button about a lot of evidence to show that the history of Germany in the First and Second World War is not what we've been told. But I think that's a conversation for another time. That one.
Yes. Yes. And some people are a little bit too programmed or sensitive to
Yeah.
hear it. I had problems explaining it to my mum because she's 75 and she's grown up believing different things to what we now know to be more likely to be true. But some people have said, "Oh, you, you can't believe for one moment that the Allies were bad and did anything wrong. They were facing an animal, an evil entity almost, that was committing the most incredible, um, vile acts." And I always urge people to remind themselves that history is written by the victors, always by the victors, and that the information I did was because, or the digging I did on the Second World War and the First World War, was based upon the fact that my grandfather, my mother's father, was Jewish, and he was from Ukraine, Crimea, and I had great aunties and great uncles that went into camps. I wanted to know. So my mum's Jewish. I was raised as Catholic, and my wife's Muslim.
Wow.
I'm a real mixed bag going on here.
That's an eclectic melting pot right there. I love
Yeah,
that. But that's a really interesting point because you say they actually elected to go to the camps as opposed to what we've
yeah,
been told.
yeah. Auschwitz in
Yeah.
particular, because of the food line being cut.
Yeah. That's that.
They had the Allies were starving the British, the German people, the civilians and children and pensioners, or
Yeah.
elderly people were dying through starvation. So often when you see pictures of malnutrition, images of people suffering from malnutrition, it was the Allies that cut off the food supply, so people were starving to death and sought sanctuary in Auschwitz. And interestingly enough, there's a series on Amazon called Grand Tour, based upon, I suppose, originally Top Gear with Jeremy Clarkson and so on. They go to
Yeah.
Auschwitz. I would urge people to watch that particular episode. It's one of their specials where they go on a road trip. They go to Auschwitz, and the guide takes them round and shows them where the ice rink was, the indoor theatre, and the cinema, and tells the story of people queuing to get in.
Wow. I'm going to watch that
Mm.
this evening.
Yeah, it's well
I
worth it. It's
didn't
an
know
eye
about
opener
that.
for anybody who
Yeah.
believes Churchill was a hero. It's a real eye opener.
Yeah, he really was not a hero, quite the opposite. But I mean, we've gone a bit off topic. But
Yeah, yeah,
the reason I wanted to bring that up is because I want everybody listening to this to realize that the history that we've been told is simply not true. Because the series that Guy and I are referring to, I'm halfway through watching, and I won't mention it here because I think I'd actually like to do a couple of episodes on it a little bit further down the line with you, Guy, amongst some other things. But the point, you're talking there about the programming, the Stockholm syndrome that we've all been programmed with.
Mm.
And even though, I have this podcast, I follow your podcast, I talk to people like you often who are really pushing the boundaries of the nature of reality. It was funny, while I was watching some of the episodes of this particular series myself, I could feel my programming going, that can't be true. That can't be true. And and I'm a massive truther as well. So it just goes to show how deeply embedded the version of history that we've been told is within us, because we've been told it from the smallest age. But I would urge everybody, just to close off that point, to really open your mind to the possibility that, generally speaking, everything's an inversion. It's something David Icke says all the time, is that everything is generally inverted. Whatever you've been told, if you think about what the opposite is, you're much closer to the truth. But Guy, going back to the Cabbage Patch conversation and 1776. It's crazy, isn't it, when we look at the figures involved? I'm not very good at arithmetic these days because I use a phone too much to do my adding up. I used to be really good at arithmetic, not anymore. But I was sort of roughly in my head thinking, well, hang on a minute, it would mean that every family would have to have at least 4 children in 100 years, and the children would have to survive to double the population, and that just wouldn't be viable for all the reasons that you've said. So for me, and I'm sure for many watching, it begs the question, why were all these clones created? For what reason? What actually happened back then?
Well, they got rid of everybody. So we saw in the sort of 1700s and the 1800s a lot of war. So we had the Napoleonic Wars. We had lots of civil wars. Across the world, we had civil wars. So they'd basically got rid of a huge number of males, because it was males typically sent to war to fight. And these wars were not done for any other reason than depopulation. People that fought in the Napoleonic Wars that I've spoken to descendants of have said that their great grandfather had written back and said that when the smoke settled, or when our view cleared and we could see better the enemy, we discovered they were wearing the same uniform as us. So a lot of it was about depopulating. What they were trying to do was get rid of adults from the previous civilization, what we refer to as Tartaria, the old world, the millennial reign of Christ. As I said to you before, we tend to use Tartaria because that term is gaining traction, and then you can from there explain exactly what it means. So you've got most of the men across the world, apart from indigenous, although a lot of those were killed through genocide. You've got predominantly males being killed off in large numbers, which leaves a lot of women. The women, as I said earlier on, through the Lunacy Act, could be incarcerated and considered insane if their husband had fallen in battle. That gives the state, the parasites as I call them, access and control over your children. So you kill off the men, you lock away the women, and then you're left with single women, or women that are widowed but not haven't had children. They're not mothers, and then they've got 2 options. They can toe the line with New World Order and how things are going to be, and stop asking what happened to free energy and why is that cathedral no longer a centre of healing, but we've got to go in there and give someone money and do what we're told. What's going on. If they're not going to question anything, they can carry on. If they are going to question things, they'll go to prison. If they keep going on about the old world, they'll go to an asylum as well. But at the same time, they started using mercury in hat manufacturing, or production, really, because they weren't actually manufacturing them as such as we would know today. Now, mercury was causing all sorts of problems with people's clarity. In addition to that, we suddenly saw things like laudanum, opium, and cocaine becoming distributed, and then along came an invention called the heirloom. Now, the heirloom pumped noxious gases into buildings, so they would go into workhouses and factories, I suppose, for want of a better expression. Even in the Houses of Parliament, they were pumping confined spaces gathered with people with gases that were making them hallucinate, think differently.
Bloody hell.
Yeah, so they basically brainwashed the entire population of Earth. And if you didn't toe the line, then you stood the chance of, if none of that worked or you weren't subjected to it, you stood the chance of actually being locked away, because prisons, asylums and orphanages opened overnight across the world. In every major town and city, they just appeared from nowhere. They were locking away thousands.
Yeah, I remember reading that in your Tartaria book, and I've in the research of other alternative researchers as well, who I rate, have said similar things, and it made me wonder straight away, what on earth have all these things appeared for? But you've just explained.
Yeah. So, and that was part of the World's Fair. The World's Fairs and expositions, that they were an opportunity to whitewash and brainwash. They took these old cities, these old what we would call Tartarian cities, painted them white because they were old, and they didn't want people to understand or to know how old these buildings and structures were. So they were whitewashed, they were painted white, and then on display is creations and inventions from the industrial revolution and new technologies. So it's a bit like going to an ideal home exhibition or something like that, where they're showcasing the latest developments, the latest labour-saving devices and technologies in these gleaming white buildings. And these people are subjected to a mass brainwashing exercise. Look at what we can do. Look at what's available now. Welcome, to the Industrial Revolution. This is where, how progressive we are. So it was an opportunity to do that. People started questioning the building, saying, well, this appears to be older than it looks, and I don't remember it being constructed. There's no evidence of it being recently constructed. I don't know anybody who worked on it. That architect doesn't exist. I've done a bit of research. So they knocked them all down, burnt them down. Bits and pieces remain today in some places in the world, but the majority were demolished. So they kind of reset us. So people have got this new narrative. Wow, we're really advanced. Look at what we can do. And all of our history's gone. Everything's gone, and we start again with a blank sheet. And that is what they do when they reset us. That is what they are doing right now. They're resetting us again. But this time, they've got AI. So they're not going to need to be repopulating.
Yeah, because as we all know, anybody who watches this will know, and it's something I'm quite vocal about, is to not get drawn into getting plugged, having your consciousness plugged into a machine, for that reason. Because going back to the World Fair thing, I remember being taught that as a kid. Being taught about the World Fairs, and that they were supposedly constructed in a year to 2 years. And I remember as a kid, I was 12 or maybe 13 years old, challenging my history teacher, because somehow I instinctively knew. I was looking at all these gorgeous, grandiose buildings, and she was saying they were knocked together in a couple of years and then demolished afterwards. And I remember thinking, what? And I remember asking the teacher, how on earth could they have been built in 2 years? Because look at the size of them and look at like how beautiful they are. And they're absolutely massive. There's no way that could have been built in 2 years. I mean, I was a 12-year-old kid. I didn't know any different. It was just a feeling that I had. And then I remember also questioning the teacher. I was like, Miss, what on earth would you build these beautiful buildings for and then knock them down? And the BS that we were told was that they just built these like plaster of Paris facades that just had wooden shuttering behind them, so that it gave the appearance of thing. But you'd look at some of the photographs and like, well, I would like, Miss, that's not plaster of Paris, because look, there's loads of stonework and statues and ornaments and stuff behind it. And of course, teacher couldn't answer, so I just got told to stop being so disruptive. But I'm like, well, it doesn't really make any sense. And again, I've mentioned him earlier, Jacob, who has the I'm the Improbable Dreamer channel online, which is well worth a look if you resonate with this conversation. He's got loads and loads and loads of really great quality videos on there from the time as well that validate what Guy's saying. It's just complete and utter nonsense. They were literally destroying the remnants of the old world and the amazing quality of life and the free technology and all the other wonderful technologies that they had available. So, Guy, does it mean that when they did that, I'm guessing that the primary reason for then creating all these orphan children, the majority of which were cloned kids, was that so they could then reset the minds of these kids so that they had no connection to what had gone before, to then create a new narrative?
Yeah, so you've got two kind of sets of children going on, if you like. You've got the ones that were cloned, who know nothing of the past, so you can give them history and they're not going to disbelieve it because they don't know anything different. Then you've got children who will remember bits and pieces, but it's beaten out of them. Yeah. You had indigenous children forced to become Catholic that were taken away by the church off to, orphanages and convents and forced to speak English, forced to discard, their traditions and belief system, and total indoctrination. So it was beaten into them. And that's actually what took place. They beat literally this into the kids themselves. So either the kids complied or they were beaten. And as for the clones, the children that they used to repopulate, really to take up the majority of the new population, they had no previous history. They had no backstory. So it was a blank sheet, and that was the intention, to rewrite history and then give these children something new. But you said that you were questioning it at school, and that's because some of us carry the DNA from our ancestors, which contains memory, and we know memory is stored within DNA.
That's a very good point.
Yeah, so you've got this built-in kind of feeling that things aren't right, certain things don't make sense, and that is because your DNA contains the information that knows what went before and how we lived before. And that is why we are the minority. That's why Dolores Cannon said that only 20% of the world think like we do and ask these questions and challenge things, because 80% come from cloning. And she described them as being soulless, which I think is quite harsh, because I think everyone has a soul or an aura, but they don't carry the memory. So they'll go along with whatever the mainstream tells them. They'll even think that, what happened with Princess Diana, for example, was just unlucky. And I say to people all the time, if you think that 9/11 was, what we were told, and some people hijacked a plane and flew it into a building, and you think that Princess Diana was just unfortunate, then it doesn't matter what we say to you or show you or how much evidence we present. You're not going to change your point of view because you're programmed differently to us.
Yeah, and people will just dig their heels in even more. I remember showing my parents a few years ago footage of controlled demolition of buildings, and then I showed them footage of the World Trade Center's center buildings coming down, and I was like, look, absolutely identical. And then I showed them footage of the original architect of those buildings, saying that they were both designed to withstand, I think it was two, maybe even three simultaneous plane strikes, and to not be bothered by it, like large passenger jet plane strikes, and again, that cognitive dissonance, the Stockholm syndrome that we talked about earlier, that again, even I felt when I was watching Europa: The Last Battle, is so entrenched in people, because people would rather, instead of open themselves up to new information that can expand their perspective and expand their worldview, even if they don't end up agreeing with it, they won't even at least consider it. What they would rather do is get out a massive mechanical excavator and dig themselves in even deeper and entrench themselves even more, because people's egos are just so frightened of being wrong about how they think the world works, because for them, I guess, they feel that ignorance is bliss. But I really love that point you raised there about Dolores Cannon as well, saying that, because I think it is true, because it's one thing that I do really, really struggle with sometimes. It's like the majority of people I come across who start asking me about what's going on in the world, and I give my opinion, and very quickly I'm like, I'm wasting my time. And that's not to be arrogant or ego driven, but I can tell that the majority of people that ever ask me about my opinion on things, and when I share it, like Diana, as you said, like what's going on, like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and what they're really doing, and so on and so on and so on. But again, that's another conversation. Let's not go off on a tangent. That's another one for another time, that one. But people just don't want to hear it, unfortunately. But still, all we can do at the end of the day is share our truth, and most importantly, provide the evidence to back up that truth. Because we were saying off camera, it's like one of my biggest bugbears with this channel is when people cast aspersions on something that somebody said. I might even get some in this conversation, but have no evidence to back it up, which is fine. I'm like, great. If you've got a different viewpoint, brilliant. This is how the world works. What evidence have you got that to back that up? And as we were saying off camera, people are, I just know it is, or it came to me in a vision, or it came to me in a meditation. Well, okay, that's a good start. Now, can we have some evidence, please? But anyway, we digress. I wanted to, one of the chapters in your book, sort of moving forward into more contemporary times, Guy, one of the chapters in your book that caught my eye was Dolly the sheep. Tell us about Dolly the sheep and the significance of that. I remember that from being younger.
Dolly the sheep's an interesting one because people need to be aware of where it took place. It's at the Roslin Institute, which is named after Roslin Chapel.
Oh.
So, as I said earlier on, I believe certain people, certain groups, certain bloodlines have the technology to clone and have had it for a very long time, going right back to the very beginning. I think this has been passed down through bloodline families like the Rothschilds, for example. So, Dolly the sheep is actually named after Dolly Parton because they used a mammary cell. So I think what they've done is, yeah. So there's a bit of trivia for you there. So again, soft disclosure. It happened at the same time that around the same time that people started talking about human cloning, and that it became a conspiracy theory to debunk or investigate further. People will argue that Dolly the sheep, that clones cannot reproduce. So I would urge them to look into Dolly the sheep because her offspring might contradict that belief.
Oh, wow. She had some little lambs.
Yeah, absolutely. And her life expectancy was shorter. They thought it would be shorter than a naturally conceived sheep, and it was. But it was because she contracted a disease. She actually became quite ill.
Right.
So it was just a coincidence. But yeah, Dolly the sheep is important because that was the first time we were publicly shown that that cloning was possible, and this was because it was starting to come out, that people were starting to talk about it, so they took control of the narrative again. Incidentally, the most successful animal to be cloned is currently just happens to be the most successful racehorse in America that is now retired and out to stud, and that horse is cloned.
That's interesting that it's out to stud, given what you've just said about the reproduction side of it.
Yeah, people just don't understand. They think that a clone doesn't have a soul, a clone doesn't bleed, was the latest one I heard. A clone can't reproduce. This is all based upon no research or anything whatsoever to substantiate it. This is based on an opinion or just a thought. But, if you look at cloning people or animals in a similar way to IVF, then then you look at our very creation, then that's suggesting that we can't bleed or reproduce, and that we don't have a soul or a connection to the source. So that's when you said it. I think it becomes quite dangerous because you've got people that turn an opinion or a thought without researching it. And me 13 years of research into cloning, based upon just an opinion, someone will challenge what you say. And I think it's important that people do that. And I think everybody has to have their own opinion and shouldn't just verbatim spout out what somebody else has said. But I do the same thing when somebody says to me, oh, well, clones can't reproduce. I'll always say to them, would you mind sharing with me, your decade of research into this, or even just a link to something I can read? Because, there are people walking around that have had their pets cloned. There are people out there that have been involved in cloning, and there are people out there that are saying, I have been cloned, and there's a company out there offering to do it to you as well for a rather large amount of money. So,
Wow.
where does your information come from?
Yeah, indeed. And I think I'm pretty sure I've actually seen a clip of uh, a, s- a- some. I mean, I'm not, as you can probably guess, I'm not really into celebrity people and celebrity lives. I don't know what we're celebrating about them, to be honest, which is what I always say. But I've seen this clip of a guy. Looks like he's in his late 20s. I think he must be some kind of pop star. And I'm pretty sure, like, he gives his serial number. He
Kid Boo.
actually, what's his name? People can look
Kid
that up.
Boo. Kid,
Kid Boo, right?
yeah, Biggie
Okay,
double U. Hold on a
I'm going to make a
second.
note of that.
Let's see if I can find him here. Might take me a moment. There. Page 125.
Oh wow!
That's
And
it.
he actually, I didn't even realize he was in your book. Brilliant.
Yeah,
So, and
yeah,
he actually gives his serial number
he
for
does. For
the clone
Clonade.
incarnation that he is now, doesn't he?
Mm,
I might try and put the clip on the show notes actually, so
mm,
people can see that for real. Because again, it, it it can seem like this is a lot to take in, but actually, what we're talking about is this is the nature of our reality. The
mm,
cotton wool world and the make believe world that we've been told we live in just simply isn't true, and it is a massive inversion as well. And that's a lovely little segue into, and it's fascinating. You mentioned there actually, Guy. Before I jump onto that there's actually, I heard you share this in a fairly recent conversation with someone that there's actually, is it a Canadian company that will clone your
yes.
pet and will probably clone you as well if you've got deep enough pockets?
Oh yeah, they will clone you. You can go onto their website. They're called Clonade, and again,
Oh,
this is a company that someone recently attempted to debunk. But you can fill in the inquiry form, and they'll contact you. So congratulations on
blooming heck.
debunking. Yeah, so yeah, they'll clone you. They'll clone your pet. Um, the president of Argentina has had at least four dogs cloned from his deceased bull mastiff, which was called
Wow.
Conan. It was around $50,000 a pop. But Clonade originally would clone you if you were having trouble conceiving. So they would
Mm.
produce a baby that looked just like you and your partner. Then they started offering to clone people who had just lost a loved one. So let's say your partner's life has been tragically cut short. They would clone, and they speed up the process in which the child becomes an adult. It's dramatically
Oh,
speeded up.
wow.
Yeah, but that's more expensive, and the technology apparently isn't as good as just actually producing a baby in the normal gestation period.
Right.
But they'll also do memory transfer.
Oh,
So
they can
if you,
do that.
yeah,
Wow.
it's called Project Lazarus. Yeah,
Mm.
they'll transfer your memory. So yeah, that company's called Clonade, and you can contact them. There's no phone number, unsurprisingly. The cloning doesn't take place in Canada, allegedly. It takes place in Mexico, where the laws are a lot more relaxed.
Of
But
course.
yeah, they're based in Clonade. The Clonade's based in Canada, and they've been around for some time now. They're not new.
Yeah. And I'm guessing very much like the technology that we get, like, where is it? This iPhone I've got here, albeit it's an old one, even if it was the latest one, effectively this is like an antique. It's like a steam-powered phone
absolutely.
compared to what's available in the deep underground military bases. So I'm
Yeah, they're
guessing
using
the
a
cloning technology that Clonade do, whilst it may appear cutting edge to us compared to what's available in the deep underground military project, it's probably decades, if not centuries, behind what they use, because I've heard all kinds of commentators who've been in secret space programs talk about how their consciousness has been sections of their consciousness have been transferred into clones that have then gone and fought battles in various places all over the galaxy, and then they've come back, and the memories can be transferred in both directions as well.
Yes.
But that said, yeah, I lost you there for a second. Yeah, but that said, still to be able to access that publicly is quite an eye opener, and that kind of leads me on to in your book. Where is it? Yeah, there's you talk about cloning in film. A couple of the chapters are cloning in film and celebrity cloning. So what did you uncover about that? And I've got some clips I want to share when you finish speaking as well, just to show what happens when they go wrong.
Well, the cloning in films has been around for some time, and I named the book because it's called Rise of the Clones, and I'm a Star Wars fan. I named it Rise of the Clones, from giving it a bit of a Star Wars kind of shout out, really. But cloning in movies has been around for a very, very long time. But celebrity cloning is really fascinating. Unfortunately, I mean, you probably can find bits on TikTok now, but BitChute was where I used to find the best information and best clips. But it's been banned in the UK. You need a VPN now to be able to access it. A lot of people aren't going to bother doing that. So, BitChute was where it's at. But, yeah, there's lots of brilliant clips. There's Hillary Clinton. There's a really good one of Conor McGregor. We've got Dave, which is Michael Jackson. Then we've got people like Britney Spears talking about it. Katy Perry malfunctioning on stage. Lady Gaga malfunctioning outside a building, getting into a car. And Kevin Hart announcing that he's cloned. There's lots and lots of these things now circulating. But I guess, unless you can get on BitChute and type in human cloning, then TikTok's probably going to have clips and bits and pieces people can watch.
Yeah. Well, I'm actually just going to share my screen right now, Guy, and because I queued these up before. Can you see this? Okay.
Yeah. I know this one. Is this the Char Latte? I recommend the Char
Latte. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So here's one of Hillary Clinton, who has been cloned. But just everyone have a watch of this.
In every way. And how much does Senator Warren? Did you talk about my presidential possibilities with Senator Warren? You guys have got to try. In every way, and I was very proud of Senator Warren.
What the heck?
Vice presidential possibilities with Senator Warren. You guys have tried. Got to try. I've had
it. What's going on here? Absolutely crazy. And actually, he's the Lady Gaga one you mentioned earlier.
Dada, you have one pizza, Dada, please.
I mean, what is going on there?
Yeah, they malfunction.
Yeah.
They're adolescent. They're programmed to do a job, to get up and sing or dance or perform. They go wrong, and that's why they'll always have someone with them. They call them a handler.
The handlers,
someone,
yeah. On that Hillary Clinton clip, actually, I think. Oh no, I'll leave that one for now. But there was I saw a clip of where one of her handlers, where she freezes and has that really crazy thing, facial expression, and one of her handlers reminds her where she is and what she's doing, This sort of big burly guy in a black suit. But the last one that I wanted to share, Guy, this is kind of cloning and perhaps robotics as well. But it's, of course, our good friend Joe Biden or whoever, whatever it was that was purporting to be Joe Biden. And I really wanted to share this because it's kind of amusing. But here's a Boston Dynamics robot trying to walk. Not doing a great job of it at the moment. Although, again, I'm sure the deep underground military base versions, we probably wouldn't be able to tell any different. And that is supposed to be the man in charge of one of the two most powerful superpowers on the planet.
Yeah.
It's crazy, huh?
Yeah. I mean, even Donald Trump, when he was interviewed on Joe Rogan, actually spoke out and said that Joe Biden is not the Joe Biden that we know. He's even slower than he used to be. It's just not him. And he actually said that. He came out and said that when he was interviewed on Joe Rogan. He said that the man's long gone. They reckon there's about half a dozen Bidens that were produced, manufactured, and for PR purposes, that Jim Carrey stood in for him with a mask.
Oh, really? Yeah, because I've seen some of those clips where you can very, very clearly see the join. They've not been very. It's almost like they wanted people to see, because I'm like, surely,
yes, it is soft disclosure.
Yeah, nobody could have been that slapdash where you can see the join on the neck, and then there's various clips where you can see it's obviously a rubber mask in terms of where the forehead moves there. And I've just thought, hang on a minute, like they clearly want people to see that. So again, as you've said.
Yeah, and if there isn't a clone available, if someone tragically died through natural causes, but without someone somewhere intervening, if someone was to end their life today through an accident or whatever, then they might not necessarily have a clone available. So they'll use a bodysuit, and this was the case with Gucci Mane. So that's an interesting story, but I won't spoil it because it's in my book. But Gucci Mane's a very interesting story where they had to do exactly that.
Oh wow, yeah, and I was listening recently to someone talking about Nicole Kidman as well. The Nicole Kidman that we see today is a clone. Apparently, she passed away about 5, 6, 7 years ago. But she has a very, very sad and quite horrific backstory. But it's the same for so many of these people who want to be famous and who want to be celebrities. But Guy, we're coming towards the end of the conversation. But one thing that I really wanted to hear you talk about was there's a chapter in the book called Ancestry.com and your DNA. And before you start, I'm just going to say to people, because loads of people at the time, about 4 or 5 years ago, everyone was going crazy for it. And I remember at the time, in the same way that when I was a kid, and I was asking my history teacher, hang on a minute, miss, this is not right. I instinctively, I don't know why, because it seemed really cool. Because I've got like a real eclectic ethnic background, because I was born in the Seychelles, and that was like a melting pot of very, very different cultures and places. I've got like Indian, Irish, African, French, you name it. I'm quite the mongrel from a DNA perspective. But I remember at the time thinking, where's that information going? And like loads of my friends were like, yeah, we've done it. And I'm like, So tell us about Ancestry.com, Guy, and how that relates to the cloning conversation.
Well, with regard to Ancestry.com, that's kind of more of a warning. I mean, my book's not just about cloning. It's showing you how populations work, how bloodlines work. Incest has been used. The desire to create life through other means, like the homunculus or the golem. And Ancestry.com was really a warning that they are very keen to find out our blood group. Ancestry.com is owned by Blackstone. Blackstone used to be, well, it's the same people really that were involved with BlackRock. Blackstone are heavily involved in bioweaponry. So by sending them our DNA, we do a couple of things. One is we provide our DNA to a company that is researching how they can attack certain groups of people. The second thing is they're using it to create us a backstory. So we send off our DNA and they link us to a family that may or may not even exist, something that isn't true, a false history. And that's filling in blanks for people. People have started questioning, hold on a minute, I can't go any further back than the 1800s in my family tree. I'll send my DNA off. Bingo, here's a load of misinformation for you. You're satisfied now. So it was an opportunity to gather people's DNA for research to do with bioweaponry, and at the same time give people this false ancestry so they can satisfy their minds that the information is there and they can trace I could trace my family tree all the way back to Adam and Eve, and this sort of nonsense. And it's filling in blanks. That's what it's doing. But you've got to be careful because the company behind it, Blackstone, it's very unusual for them to own a company like Ancestry.com. It's got nothing to do with their other investments. But when you start digging into the bioweaponry and researching what they do and how they're looking for certain bloodlines and why, then it all starts to make sense. So my theory is that, and there's a lot of research in there that people can read, my theory is that they're actually looking for people. They're looking for certain people, certain bloodlines, certain DNA. From the research I've done, it would appear that what I call the parasites, these bloodline families that all descend ultimately from the Rothschilds and Amun-Ra, their DNA is different to ours. Their blood group is one that we're not aware of. So I think Ancestry.com are also looking for certain bloodlines and blood groups, and I think one of them may well be Rh null. I think that's something that they're searching for.
Oh, fascinating. That wasn't something I'd ever considered. So they're actually looking for where descendants of their blood group
Jesus.
might have scattered to, and ultimately, they're
looking for descendants from Yeshua.
Wow, that's fascinating. So yeah, I'm doubly pleased that I didn't do that now, because I guess if they do find someone, they'll come for you, and
Yes.
you'll be carted away and absorbed into their world, their environment, their system, and I would guess there's not a huge amount you can do to stop them without threat of destruction of your family and well-being and everything else that goes with it, I'm guessing.
Well, someone that I knew was working with was working with the British, was working with the American government. He was working with remote viewing, and he was a contractor. And when he started working for them, it was the NSA that he was attached to. He had a medical. They took bloods for analysis. They discovered he was Rh null. He's my friend. He's the musician's son, Eric Clapton. He's his eldest son, Michael, his name is. Anyway, so they find out he's Rh null, knowing that there are only 43 people on this realm, if you like, that have that blood group. He was immediately asked to go and work in their remote viewing division, and he was there for about 9 years. He then whistle blew, and a series of very unfortunate events. He now doesn't own his own home anymore. He's had to move about. He was severely beaten, almost to death, by the men in black, detached retinas. He's had to have surgery, all sorts of work on his face, reconstructing bones and so on. But he's back up and running again now, and he's speaking out. He's speaking out again, but he's protected himself with a dead man switch. So, he should be left alone now. And I think now it's something you can talk about, and it's a bit easier to just brush it off or just leave it alone. But at the time, one blood test, saw his blood group, and he was immediately sent to remote viewing.
Blooming heck, yeah. I actually need to have a blood test for a small health reason. I'm not sure I want to go and do it now.
Yeah. I would look
But
at every alternative to the health service intervening. I would look at absolutely every single
yeah,
alternative before I went down that road.
yeah, that's very, very sage advice. But I'm glad that Michael is still around, because yeah, that's a very, very, very high risk and dangerous world to
Mm.
push back against.
Yeah, I
So
think they
yeah,
thought they'd killed him, but they hadn't. But
yeah, fair play to him. So, like last time, Guy, I feel as though we've only just warmed up and got started, but we're sort of pretty much out of time. You have to excuse the noise in the background. The gardeners here doing the lawn. But what are you working on, Guy? What's coming up next for you?
well, every day on Facebook, I post something to spark um, a thought process. And these are just posts that range from ChatGPT and what really is going on there to Richard Branson and the similarities between him and Jeffrey Epstein. So a thought-provoking post every day, and I put some artwork with it as well. And someone said to me when I started doing this, is this part of a book or something? Is this a book I'm not aware of? And I thought about it, and I realised that if I expanded upon each post on social media, that I could write a book that's almost an A to Z of all the conspiracy theories we're not allowed to talk about. The places people don't go, who is the Antichrist, for example, and going further back than just accusing the Rothschilds of being a bloodline parasitic family, but actually providing some pretty damning information and evidence. So a lot of them can't go onto Facebook. I have to censor them, and sometimes I'll say, you need to go on my website to read today's blog because this one's going to get me banned. So I decided to turn them into an A to Z. So it's basically exactly what it says on the tin. Conspiracy theories from Agatha to zombies. And that's out on the 1st of December. And there'll be this time, rather than 3 months later, the audio book will come out on the same day. So it's a lot of work in the pipeline. But I'm juggling that and writing a script for my first book, which is going to be a documentary with the team at Iconic. And I'm just struggling to find the time to do the two things. But with a good following win, 1st of December, the book number 3 will be on sale.
Brilliant! I'm really looking forward to that. And of course, I will have to get you back in the hot seat in the new year sometime to dive into some of those. And I love, as we were saying off camera, I love that you're doing some work with Iconic, because I love what those guys do. Had Christian van Wyk on, I think it was actually the last broadcast before this one will be, which will be going out 3-4 days after we record. Because, yeah, the world needs to hear this information. And if it is a smaller group, at least then they are people that are open to this. And hopefully by osmosis, it then begins to... open the hearts and the minds of people that they're connected to as well. So, Guy, usually, as you remember from last time, I do the 3 quickfire questions, but we've already done that. So my closing question is, what message would you like to leave for the Superliminal audience?
Oh, that's a really hard one. I suppose how I personally feel is a question I ask myself a lot. I dig into a lot of conspiracy theories. Some of them are hard to believe, and I suppose my question would be: would you rather spend the rest of your life believing a lie, or would you rather be proven wrong? And I ask myself that all the time. If someone was to tell me tomorrow that everything that I've been writing about and researching is a lie, and that actually here is the truth, and it's something completely different to what any of us could have ever imagined, I would rather hear it and see it than carry on researching what could be a misdirection or the wrong rabbit hole. So I guess that's my question. Would you rather know the truth, no matter how painful, or spend the rest of your life believing a lie.
Wow, that is so, so powerful. And I hope that everybody listening to this agrees with the obvious answer, because otherwise, what's the point? Because when we leave our bodies, we'll look back and go, oh,
Yeah, got that wrong.
got that wrong. Might have to go and do it all again.
Yes.
So, Guy, that's a really beautiful place to wrap up for now. And to everybody watching, as usual, thanks ever so much for tuning in. Please do share this episode. I'll leave a link as a pinned comment. Please do share this with somebody else that you think may enjoy listening to Guy's wisdom and the rest of the guests on Superliminal Podcast, of course. Thank you as ever to my regulars who always comment and tune in. I really, really, really appreciate your support. And again, please do like, comment, share, and also remember to hit the little bell button as well that tells you every time a new episode has come out. But thanks ever so much to everyone that's tuned in. And of course, Guy, it's been wonderful to have you here. I've loved this conversation. I feel like we could go for another hour or two. But I really, really, given how busy you are, I really appreciate you sharing your wisdom and experience with Superliminal. So thanks a lot, mate.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
Brilliant. And we will see you all again soon. Thanks a lot. Bye for now.